moto ona bango.
Greetings to you all who have joined us for the Staples Trust Policy Dialogue Forum. This evening is the continuation of three previous ones we have been holding since this CAB 3, as it's called, process has begun. And today we are looking at the conduct of the so-called consultation process and the vagaries thereof, under the title, The Scourge of Violence and Impunity, which has accompanied the process. We have with us prominent persons who have been at the forefront of the fight against, fight back against CAP 3. Let me begin by saying that it is an understatement to say Zimbabwe is in a crisis. It's been in a crisis for a long time. It's a crisis of the state, reflected in both this scourge of violence and the rise of the security of the last 20 years or more. A security state, the violence, intimidation therein as a reflection of the incapacity for reform. And the coup of 2017 is both a symptom of that, but also an indication of the unraveling of this very state. The contrast with regard to both the incapacity to reform and the extent to which we've had in 47 years only two heads of state, the last one, the current one, through a coup. And the contrast of the region. Just the other day, I saw a photograph of the president, the new president of Mozambique, standing along with three previous presidents, Chissano, Nyusi, and Guebuza. And the pattern is quite familiar. The pattern is quite familiar across the region, where succession has been orderly, where the elections have been orderly for most, in contrast to our situation where every election is a war zone. But I think it's important to point out that what we are going through now with respect to CAP 3 is a reflection of henceforth for the beginning of the end. An end which began with the coup itself in 2017, but a crisis which has been exacerbated over the years in the clear indication that the post-coup regime is unable to turn things around. That it's almost an inevitable end, except that this time round we are threatened with a real possible bloody end to this very crisis. And the specter of violence already within the state, led by what appears to be a parallel campaign. We are familiar with the reign of the CIO and the special forces, but it appears now we have another one. This is reflected in the manner in which the bombing at Surface Trust on the 28th of October to this day, there is no explanation from the state. I phoned the Commissioner General of Police at the time. He promised an investigation. It's 6 months now, and there's no indication on a scene which was clearly a terrorist operation on that day. And we saw how Maroblo Maduku was beaten up, again, by elements which are not completely disassociated from the police. So in discussing the violence and impunity, we cannot avoid having to raise questions about the role of the ZRP as an arm of the state and the extent to which the impunity surrounding it. For example, the National Center the other day, a member of the Central Committee of ZANU-PF, caught on camera, another one caught on camera beating up Doug Coulthard. And up to now, not a single indication that the law enforcement authorities are taking any action. This is the kind of impunity that we're talking about. So Tony Rila will give us an outline of that, but more important so far is we'd like to get an indication, one, and I hope Tendai BT will help us, the trajectory henceforth of this process, called the CAP 3 process. Is it likely to be passed by Parliament? And if so, what is civil society and the retired generals, the war veterans, all those forces which have spoken out loud against this amendment? And secondly, we'd like to know which way forward. Out of this crisis, we must begin thinking what follows next. Less to speak about elections in 2028, especially since we know that there is unlikely to be a reform of the electoral process before that, which makes the election process completely fraudulent. And therefore, for some of us, we've been thinking, and much more so now, about the National Transition Authority as the only possible alternative to the current crisis that Zimbabwe finds itself in. So on that note, I'd like to bring in Tony Rila as my first panelist. Tony Rila is active in civil society for almost all his life. Currently, we work together on the Surface Trust Policy Dialogue, and he's an expert on the violence that has accompanied the political process in Zimbabwe, particularly since 2000. But as he will say, it is been a dominant feature of the political process in Zimbabwe, even pre-independence. Then I'll bring in Jameson Timber, the convener of the DCP. He will tell us more about where we stand now with respect to this CAP 3. And we're hoping that Edison Nyarambi, former ZIPA commander and a regular commentator on the Surface Dialogue platform, but I believe he has problems with the internet in Bulawayo, where he's speaking from. I think the cable has been damaged by workmen, so he's trying to get onto the platform. Last but not least, I will have Tendai BT, who needs no introduction, convener of the CDF, and a major voice, has been so for a long time, and you will help us, especially on the way forward. So, Tony Rila, welcome.
Thank you, Eva. Good evening, everybody. I'd like to say it's a pleasure to be talking about violence and impunity, but this has been going on so long in my life. My task today is to really just unpack the first part of the title of this dialogue, which is violence and impunity, and to try to point out what we should mean when we talk about violence and how to understand what we should mean and what it's linked to as in impunity. Now, David, I want to share something, if I may, and I'd like people to keep their eye on this as I talk. I hope this is, no. Sorry. No, that's not what I want to say. Okay, let's try again. Sorry, folks. You're dealing with an elderly here. Okay. Window. David, help. I can't see my screen. Share screen. All right, it's not critical. I can talk to it. In 1990, representatives of I would think about 30 African countries came together in a conference in Harare to discuss the violence across our region, and in particular Southern Africa. And that conference came up with a definition of organized violence and torture. What was very important about that definition is it was crafted by Africans who understood how the state uses violence against people. And I want to point out here that this definition predated the Rome Statute, which was passed by the world, the United Nations, in 1998. So this definition covered all sorts of things, but its major import was to point out the various ways in which the state uses violence against its people. It wasn't merely torture they were talking about. They talked about imprisonment without trial, apartheid, forced displacement, political violence, all according to some declared or implied strategy and or system of ideas and attitudes. This was central because this was crafted by people who were looking at the consequences of organized violence and torture throughout the region and across Africa. Now, what is important in understanding that is that you have to bear in mind there's organized violence and torture that is inflicted directly by the state, but it is also inflicted by people who act on behalf of the state and whose behavior is condoned by the state. And we have a very, very recent example that harks all the way back over the years of what happened to Lovemore Muduku and his colleagues at the NCA. A group of men rushed in and, as the press reports, beat everybody. While that was happening, the police were outside and they were watching. That is an explicit definition of state-condoned violence. What that means is what was inflicted on Lovemore Muduku and his associates was torture. It's not assault or just mere violence. This is deliberate infliction of harm according to an ideology or a strategy, and that is condoned by the state. And that's very, very important. Now, sometimes this organized violence and torture is restricted in area. But under the Rome Statute, they talk about various crimes, war crimes, crimes against humanity, and genocide. And they talk about this organized violence and torture as representing a much more serious issue if it is widespread and systematic. Now, widespread and systematic characterizes the violence that has taken place in Zimbabwe for 60 years. It was there during the Liberation War, without any doubt. And I think the violence and the organized violence and torture that took place during the Liberation War should have evoked both war crimes and crimes against humanity. But widespread and systematic happened again and again and again since independence. It happened in the 80s in Gukurahundi, of which we've heard much stuff over the last year or so. It happened in the 2000 election, it happened in 2002, and it happened in 2008. The organized violence and torture there was carried out by agents of the state and by agents whose behavior was condoned by the state. Those would all fit the definition of very serious crimes. Now, I might add that, some people said the forced displacement that took place in 2005 during Operation Murambashina also reached the criteria for what could be considered a crime against humanity. Now, all of these crimes that took place from 1965 to 2026 are covered by impunity. And it's important to understand just how serious this relationship between organized violence and impunity is. Now, the first statute of impunity was passed, as far as I'm aware, in 1975. And therefore, I want to distinguish between formal statutes of impunity, formal impunity. This is where the state passes laws to forgive crimes against humanity, organized violence, and torture. To my knowledge, that's happened probably 6 times in our history. In 1975, one of the most evil statutes of impunity was passed by the Smith government, the Indemnity and Compensation Act. And many are too young to know about this. But that statute of impunity gave license to the Rhodesian security forces to torture, displace, do everything it will, as long as they were on government duty. Right? And not only did they allow that, they made it retrospective to cover the crimes that had been committed between 1972 and 1975. And it is no surprise to all of you that those of us who documented the organized violence and torture during the Liberation War saw organized violence and torture take off like a rocket after that statute of impunity was passed. That was proactive impunity. It gave people license to commit torture, rape, executions, mass murder in the camps in Mozambique and Zambia. Now, the end of the Liberation War was also covered by a statute of impunity, one imposed by the colonial power who assumed the government of Zimbabwe. So in 1979, an amnesty was passed forgiving everybody everything they'd done. And that was ratified the following year by the Zimbabwean government. In 1987, at the end of the Gukurahundi process, another general amnesty was declared that forgave all the crimes that were committed, the organized violence that took place between 82 and 87. A statute of impunity was also passed by Robert Mugabe in 2000 after the violence that took place in the 2000 general election, and again in 2002. And so this has continued to date. Gross human rights violations, widespread, systematic, are covered over by a formal statute of impunity. Now, formal statutes of impunity have a very bad press in the world. Nobody likes impunity. So this government has found a form of practical impunity. And Ibo Mandaza mentioned just 2. He mentioned the practical impunity that took place after a terrorist attack on Sapes with no investigation, okay, and no investigation or charges being made against the people who tortured Lovemore Maduku and his colleagues. So this is one form of what I will call practical impunity. What you do is you take no action. A serious crime involving torture or disappearances or abductions or rape takes place and nothing happens. There's no investigation, or you are told investigations are pending. It just disappears into the ether. There's a much more active version, and this has been very present since 2000. And this is where you turn the tables on the victims. Victims go and they complain to the police. And what happens is the perpetrators also go to the police and they make a similar charge. And what happens is the person who is the victim is charged with a crime. And that crime then results in them being charged, getting bail, reporting to a police station and waiting for years and years and years for their case to be heard. And there are thousands of cases like that from 2000 onwards. This is very practical impunity. So practical impunity is a way of avoiding the problems of a government trying to cover up and look bad in the eyes of the international community. So what I'm trying to get at here is for 60 years, we see this cyclical process. We have organized violence and torture followed by impunity. Impunity leads to the notion that organized violence and torture is justifiable, and then it's cured once again by impunity. The cycle has been going on and on and on for 60 years. Now, I'm coming to the end there. I'm just setting a framework for the discussions of my good colleagues, Jamison and Tendai. One of the things that struck me recently from October last year and before that is that since 2000, roughly, more seriously from 2002, the international community has had Zimbabwe in its sights as a government that violates human rights. They were a serious reason behind the United States implying the Zimbabwe economic and democracy, economic and reconstruction, I can never remember, ZEDERA, between the EU sanctioning Zimbabwe, personal sanctions, and withdrawing them. And over the years, the statements made by the international community about the breaches of human rights, the violation of the rule of law, and when I go back to practical impunity, I'm talking very strongly about the violation of the rule of law, inaction, and turning victims into perpetrators massively violates the rule of law. And there are endless documents produced by the Human Rights NGO Forum, by Zimbabwe Lawyers for Human Rights, who show that. But in the last year or so, there is this deafening silence from the international community. There is no protest. There is no protest about terrorist acts. There's no protest when Lovemore Maduku is assaulted. There's no protest when violence takes place around meetings and bannings take place. And the question is why? And I'm not privy to the answer of why the international community does that. But it does seem to me that there's a hands-off approach that encourages the likelihood of organized violence and torture, and encourages, and not encourages, but at least supports the notion that these forms of practical impunity will be tolerated for some greater good. And I'm not certain what that greater good is. So the point I'm making is that what happens today around Constitutional Amendment No.3 and the process that we see are no different from what we have seen for 60 years. It's the same process, using the same strategies, with the same approaches to stopping accountability. And these two evils, and I think the word violence is minimalist. We must be using the word organized violence and torture, because that's what it is. It is organized and it's cured by impunity. Thank you very much, Ivo.
Thanks, Tony. Thanks very much indeed. So we have endemic violence which accompanies the state. Is there, to what extent, Tony, can we say that under what conditions do you think we can exercise this tradition or scourge of violence, which has been part of our politics? One of the things which shocked me in post-independence was the extent to which the state, led as it was in post-independence, by people who had spent half their political lives in prison and detention, that they could easily put fellow citizens into prison with impunity. Could never understand that. Is this because violence has been part and parcel of our very life? That you talked about the extent to which there's been no protest at this violence. The extent to which the public appears to have gotten used to violence. Not to mention the endemic fear. I know, for example, since the attack on subvert, many people have stopped coming there out of fear that it may be bombed out of existence. Is this a deliberate stance on the part of the state to instill fear in the population? And is that also reflected in electoral processes? I've argued before that the extent to which people's vote is simply stolen shows a high level of disdain for the people, for the masses. Tony?
Well, no state globally ever resolves the link between organized violence and torture and impunity without a thoroughgoing transition. There's no doubt about that. It doesn't reform. This resort to organized violence and torture is almost in the DNA of this nation. This is how we problem solve political opposition. You yourself have made the point over many, many years now that when you view your opposition, whether it's a political party, whether it's civil society, with whoever it is, when you label them as enemies, the resort to organized violence and torture is just round the corner. So it's a practical defense of political power. So without a thoroughgoing transition and a change in the nature of the state, this will not be eliminated. And it's for that reason that in 1992, in the aftermath of the collapse of the Mediterranean dictatorships, the dictatorships in South America, that the international community accepted that impunity has to be challenged by a process. Theoretically, we were going to have that process under the National Peace and Reconciliation Commission. It achieved nothing. In fact, I think it made things worse. So we have never faced this. And I personally, I don't know that you can ever deal with the link between organized violence and impunity in the context of a state that is committed to using those tools in order to maintain power. I think, as you say, the country requires a major transition in order to be able to deal with it. And the point to be made in all of this, and I haven't made it, is the consequence of all of that causes immense human suffering. This is so well documented. So we are talking in Zimbabwe about hundreds of thousands of people who've been the victims of organized violence and torture, for whom there has been no healing, and there's been no redress, and there's no conversation about them. Okay, so it's scarcely surprising that once bitten, twice shy. And that applies to elections, it applies to protest, it applies to expressing your voice. It is an extremely evil process that the country has adopted and maintained for 40 years, more than 40 years now. 60. Thank you.
Thanks, Tony. We'll come back to you. Jameson Timber. Timber. Jameson.
He's muted. Unmute.
Jameson, can you come in, please? Timber. Can you come in, Timber? David, can you help him, David? Hello, Jameson. Incredible. Tendai, I just have to bring you in. I don't know what's wrong with Jameson. I don't know, understand. People knew we have this program and you don't mobilize the requisite type of network. It's just incredible. Tendai BT, please come in, Tendai.
Yeah, well, good evening. Well, Tony has spoken on the theory of violence and impunity. Violence and terrorism are an inextricable infrastructure of ZANU-PF. Unfortunately, violence is also inextricably connected to Zimbabwe as a state. If you trace the history of our country from 1890, the inescapable conclusion is that Zimbabwe is a state in permanent crisis, and that we've never gone more than 15 years from 1890 without periods of violence episodes. So from that point of view, you can say that Zimbabwe is a state in permanent crisis because of these periodic reproductions of episodes and bouts of violence. The state has reproduced violence continuously from 1890 in a bid to reproduce itself. It closed space before independence, and that closure of space generated inevitable counter-violence to unseat it. So the tragedy is that whereas pre-independent violence was a response to lack of legitimacy, post-independent violence now reinforces the state's own lack of legitimacy. So lack of legitimacy, particularly that associated with the so-called Second Republic, becomes a fundamental infrastructure of the state. Violence becomes a fundamental component in the reproduction of the state. And because the state is founded on a liberation movement whose sole motto was violence, the state itself is violent. The state itself is terrorist. And violence is not just a means of reproducing power, a means of maintaining power, but it's also pathological. The state finds pleasure in inflicting violence on its people. There is a pathological ideation, if I might call it, that, and we've seen it over the years that violence is wantonly distributed with great impunity, as if people enjoy inflicting pain, torturing people, and so forth. And we have seen this. So whether it's Gukura Wundi, 82 to 87, 30,000 people were left for dead. Whether it's the violence associated with the land reform program. And by the way, all these episodes of history, violence was avoidable. The dialogue that took place between Joshua Ngomo and Robert Mugabe in November 1987, resulting in the Unit Accord of 22 December, could have taken place in 1982, and people wouldn't have lost their lives. The violence associated with the land reform program, again, was totally unnecessary. Legal reforms that took place, particularly Chinamasa's bill, constitutional bill, or number 17, of 2000 could have resolved and avoided violence. The violence of 2008 and all the lives that were lost could have been avoided by a simple dialogue between the MDC and ZANU-PF, as in fact eventually happened. But now we are in a new phase of violence associated with the CAB 3. So this is what I want to talk about. But I want to make two fundamental points. Number one, that violence and terror against citizens is an essential component of the state's reproduction. Secondly, so violence becomes a pillar. But the second pillar of the regime is obviously impunity, is obviously lack of accountability. And as I've always said before on this very platform, these liberation movements that take over at independence function on three things: the couch of entitlement, the couch of impunity. You can't do anything to us, and impunity simply means that they are not accountable. The zero-sum game. If we can't have it, no one can have it. But a major component, particularly of the Second Republic, is corruption, is aggrandizement, is how the state is an arena of personal accumulation. In the Second Republic, corruption is the holy grail of this regime. State capture has been redefined and refocused and reproduced by this cabal. The state is now owned by syndicates, by cartels, some of whom are very fat, the Kudakwasheta Gwireis of this world. And the capture of the state is so entrenched, so entrenched. And you cannot look at CAB 3 without understanding that CAB 3 is owned and sponsored by the cartels and syndicates that own the state. The whole idea, for instance, of introducing clause 4 of that bill, of removing and amending section 91 of the Constitution, so that the president is now elected by parliament, is to guarantee that in future, someone who is so unelectable, someone who is so unpopular, can become president through the vehicle of a parliament of 280 people that can be bought. The whole idea of lengthening the term of office and changing the electoral cycle to 7 years has nothing to do with the genuine ZANU-PF, the original ZANU-PF, the liberation struggle. So both the concept of parliament choosing a president and the concept of 7 years have nothing to do with ZANU-PF. But cartels now, who can't win an election, and want to loot for as long as possible. And if you strip the discussion and the dialogue of all niceties, you'll find the end of Tagire there, the end of Tungwarara there, and other syndicates and cartels there. If you look at the fuel crisis that we are facing, Zimbabwe had more than 3 million cubic liters in reserve. So the fuel increase of over 60% were totally unnecessary. But because cartels are in charge, they increase fuels. Other countries have removed levies, and Zimbabwe has got piles and piles of levies on their fuel, including carbon tax, including a petrol-ted levy. Other countries, including Zambia, have suspended those levies for 3 months. That could have happened if the government was not owned by cartels. You have seen recently the digitization of title deeds. Cartels are in charge of that. The law firms that are going to do that work, they are owned and controlled by cartels. So everything in Zimbabwe has to be viewed from the viewpoint of power retention and from the viewpoint of the bottom line. Any action taken by the government can only be understood rationally if one understands that cartels and syndicates are in charge, and that Zimbabwe is nothing but a vassal of these mafia and bandits in suits. So CAB 3 is the ultimate synthesization of power, of grabbing power. That's why it is a coup against the people of Zimbabwe. And so we saw what happened, and it's important to describe, what happened. This violence didn't start on the 30th and 31st of March 2026. We saw the violence on the 28th of October 2025. As a mayor attempted a press conference at Sapes, resulted in Sapes being bombed, resulted in the home of Gilbert Mbwente being bombed. Same modus operandi. And I saw the Sapes bombing. I saw Gilbert Mbwente's bombing. It is the same fingerprint that I saw when I drove to Sanyati to go and bury Blessed Geza. His home had been destroyed. Same pattern. The same people who bombed Sapes Trust, Gilbert Mbwente, are the same people who destroyed Blessed Geza's home. Same modus operandi, and I guess same instruments, violence. What we saw with the CAB consultations was a systematic, well orchestrated agenda of closure of political space. People were bussed. In Epworth, for instance, people were called at some venue. They were asked to go into buses. They were given chicken in. You get your chicken in, and you get into buses. So poverty has been weaponized. Poverty has been instrumentalized. This pattern happened all over the country, whether Bulawayo Large City War, Ngeta, Dema, Epworth, Chiredzi, Murewa, Mutawatawa. These 68 meetings. Alternative voices were drowned out. The few people who dared to speak out, in many of these centers, they were physically beaten there immediately after giving evidence. This happened in Kwekwe. This happened in Ngezi, Mondoro. This happened in Chiredzi, where Gilbert Mtebuke was literally cut his femur, his legs, and right now he's fighting for his life. I spoke to his wife a few days ago. She's traumatized. The young lady is traumatized by the violence she saw being unleashed on her husband. In Murewa, there were people who came from 15 village who were prepared to go and speak. Their own relatives told them that if you speak, they're going to kill you. Please don't speak. And I've got video clips of the relatives saying to the people who are going to speak against the bill to say, sit, don't bother to say anything. In Mutare, Superman Dwanza was at Old Mutare, was at Sakuva, personally ensuring that anyone who was going to speak against this bill could not speak. So the likes of David Kimini, the likes of Trevor Sarawaka could not speak. The City Sports Center, you also what happened. They deliberately gave the microphone to a ZANU-PF chairperson who was moving from bay to bay, giving the microphone. They deliberately left Bay 8 where we were sitting. By the time that they came to Bay 8, the ZANU-PF tag literally ran away with the microphone. By that time, the atmosphere was so tense, and it was so clear that the bandits had circled our bay. We had to literally be shuffled out of that stadium. And those who were slow to follow us, Doug Coltart, Fadzai Mahere, were assaulted in broad daylight. A ZANU-PF Central Committee member took Doug Coltart's mobile phone. And the greatest insult was to ask Doug Coltart that he is not, a Zimbabwean. But even before then, we, for instance, at CDF, we've gave police notification for over 25 meetings. They've been refused. We've tried to have private meetings. They have refused. They've barricaded my office more than 3 times. Heavy vehicles as if I'm in Osama bin Laden. On the 21st of March, I was in Mutare having a private meeting at a private residence, at a private house. We had just finished the closing prayer. They burst in and arrested us. Yet the provisions of MOPO are clear. They don't apply to those meetings. We tried to launch the CDF. They came at our offices, beat up people, including women. We ended up doing it in a little office, somewhere. They followed us. It was, we played hide and seek with them. It's just unbelievable. I've never seen such high-handedness, even during the time of Robert Mugabe. And what you are seeing here are the same fingerprints of Gukurawundi. What you are seeing here is the same fingerprints of the violence of 2008. As I'm talking to you right now in the townships, people are not allowed to gather. Bars are being closed early, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock. People are being told to go home. I was speaking to some people in Epworth right now who are saying it's almost like a curfew in Epworth. They don't want people to gather. They don't want people to discuss the toxic CAB 3. So we've got a de facto state of emergency as I'm talking to you right now. But the fact of the matter is that this bill is completely unpopular. The people of Zimbabwe are against this bill. And the position of the majority of Zimbabweans, withdraw this bill. That's withdraw this bill, desecuritize the state. Let's have dialogue towards a national transitional authority, but withdraw this bill. If you're not going to withdraw it, then follow the law, stick to the law. The law demands adequate, genuine, bona fide public consultations. This is spelled out in section 141 of the Constitution. This is spelled out in section 328, subsection 4 of the Constitution. The sham process that took place on the 30th and 31st of March 2026 cannot be described by any standard to be a consultation that meets the constitutional test. The bottom line is that Parliament has failed to fulfill its constitutional obligations defined in Section 141, defined in Section 328, subsection 4. And by the way, Parliament itself is obliged in Section 117 to protect and uphold the Constitution. They failed and failed dismally. Jacob Mdenda has been a disaster, and he has used this process, supported this process in the hope that he may be rewarded by being made a vice president at some stage. So the bottom line is that official space, public space, has been closed and shut down completely. And when you do that, you make inevitable unconstitutional processes. You make inevitable constitutional responses. And this is exactly where Emerson Mnangagwa is. So the country, as I'm talking to you right now, is on a knife edge. The country is on a precipice. When Air Vice Marshal Muchena issues a statement and gives a public interview in those very bold terms, he's not speaking for retired generals. He's speaking for the officers' mess at KG6, for the officers' mess at New Serum, whatever the name of that barrack. So the country is on a knife edge right now, and unfortunately, and this is why I've used the word pathological, because any normal, objective person can actually see the intense, levels of instability that are now arresting Zimbabwe. So the logical thing would be either to withdraw the bill or to call for dialogue amongst all the important stakeholders. But one has to be psychologically sick, one has to be pathological to continue on a pathway which is clearly leading to an implosion, which is why I keep on referring to pathology. I keep on referring to a narcissistic personality disorders arresting the people that are driving this process. And the narcissistic trait is coming from the fact that a lot of them are now so obsessed with the idea of being a president. The most obscene example being Kudata Gbire. Look at the vehicles he moves around with. Look at the bodyguards he moves. He already sees himself as a head of his state. So it's pathological. But unfortunately, that pathology is pushing and driving Zimbabwe to a point of no return. And unfortunately, unlike 2017, the next time around is not going to be seamless. The next time around is going to be bloody. People are going to die. This country is going to break. This country is going to collapse. And nobody wants that. Nobody wants that. So we hope that wisdom and objectivity can prevail. So I foresee a situation where ZANU-PF will continue and push, the cartels will push, but I foresee citizens pushing back. I foresee protests. I foresee a massive litigation. I foresee reactions from inside the state. I foresee reactions from inside ZANU-PF itself against this bill. So I foresee a collision between the forces of good and the forces of evil. I foresee a collision between those that are the cartels that are supporting CAB 3 and those like myself and many others that are resisting it. And unfortunately, kumagumo kuninyaya, that is all I can say. But we want peace. We want the constitution to be respected. That's why we are protecting it. That's why we are defending it. But these pathological cartels are pushing our country to a point of no return. So the only safe valve is to withdraw the bill. The only safety valve is to have dialogue. The only safety valve is the National Transition Authority. The international community, they've joined the Mui Club. They're quiet. You know, the embassies, the British embassy, the American embassy, the European, the Africans. But their quietness doesn't mean that they're not paying attention. And it doesn't mean that cables are not being written. And it doesn't mean that positions are not hardening up in many capitals. This I can tell you. So whilst they've gone quiet, their capitals are watching and following what is happening in Zimbabwe very, very, very closely. And I think that at a certain point, there will be a reaction. At a certain point, there will be a reaction from the international community. And I don't think that they will react to support the regime. I don't think that they will react to support the cartels. So if I were a cartel myself, I'll be very, very worried because the region is watching. Africans are watching, and Africans are not happy about what is happening here. And I know that there are massive consultations that are taking place behind doors amongst African leaders. I'm sure some of you saw what my friend, the president of Botswana, said recently about term limits and how anyone who wants to, any leader who wants to extend the term limit is basically failed. Because what can you do in 2 years that you have failed to do in the case of Mr. Mnangagwa, that you have failed to do in 44 previous years? Remember, he's been in government since 1980. So it's a joke, really. So I want to conclude by saying that we need wisdom, we need humility, but we need the capacity to keep on confronting. We are doing it. Jameson Timber is here, the DCP is here, the CDF is here, and many other bodies. But the people that matter must be told and must understand in no uncertain terms that they've taken us back to that portal of instability that surrounded this country around 2014, 2015, 2016. And we know what happened. The country imploded. No one wants that. So I hope wisdom can prevail. There is still enough time. But the problem with power is that people get intoxicated. People get seduced by the exuberance of their emptiness. And that, regrettably, is what is happening at the present moment. So one can say, without being a rocket scientist, that we are heading to Armageddon. And Armageddon is going to be very, very rough and very, very nasty. I'll stop here.
Thanks, Tendai. Thanks very much. As usual, very coherent. I think you have outlined the problematic. Just one or two questions before I move on to Jameson, in the hope that Jameson can expand on them too. Now, why is this do or die on the part of those who are pushing this Amendment 3? Is there some inherent fear of tomorrow on their part? Why is there such desperation on the part of what you call the cartel?
The cartel has committed massive crimes against the people of Zimbabwe. The cartel has got dockets. I was the chairperson of the Public Accounts Committee. Kudakwache Tagwire has a lot to answer in respect of command agriculture. We proved in that Public Accounts Committee that billions were paid to him, but we couldn't find corresponding considerations. We couldn't find assets or goods and services that were delivered in exchange of the billions that he got paid. There's a docket around the DEMA project. DEMA project was awarded to Tagwire. He's been posting about it. For instance, they were selling electricity to the Zimbabwean government at 34 cents a kilowatt, when Eskom was selling the same electricity at 12 cents a kilowatt. But most corruptly, they were given duty-free status to import diesel, but they didn't use it for DEMA. They put it on and flooded it on the market. Kuvimba and Mutapa, they acquired assets from ZMDC, which they put in Kuvimba, mining assets. Then they realized that these things don't make money and needed huge investments. They go and sell those same assets now to Mutapa and get $1.9 billion without any due diligence, without any validation. That's an obvious docket. The road contracts, Tech Trababalas, built for over almost $150 million, yet the true cost is not worth more than 40 million. So they are drowning in crimes of greed, and any future government will have to prosecute them. Any future government will have to go after them. So it is because of this that they've become so desperate. Look at what they've just done, the millions that they've made in the last 2 weeks alone from fuel. How can you increase fuel that you are already holding in stock that you bought 6 months ago? The reason why countries build reserves and buffers, the reason why we've got reserves at Feruka, reserves at Masasa, is so that there are shock absorbers if you have a supply side disruption, which we've had in the Strait of Hormuz. So it's criminal activities. And of course, they are megalomanias. Power corrupts, and the thought of power has corrupted them, absolutely. Lord Acton was wrong when he says power corrupts. Power doesn't corrupt. It's the idea of power. They thought that you've got power, and they are now drunk on it. They drive in limousines. They've got private jets. They are drunk and intoxicated by the exuberance of their own of their own shallowness.
Can we conclude that the 2030 agenda is less about ED than about this cartel, and that
Absolutely.
accordingly,
The man is 80 something years.
Yeah,
the man wants to rest. 88,
yeah.
He has got so many children. He's got so many grandchildren. The man wants to rest. He has got lots of mombes that he wants to enjoy at Precab and many other farms. The man wants to rest.
Now, can we also conclude that basically that these guys, the cartel, are in charge of the state at the moment? From your
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. They control Mtuli. They control George Guamatanga. They control the chief secretary. They control the attorney general. So that's government, because government is basically those people.
So I'll come back to you. We need to understand very carefully how to confront the elephant in the room as part of the fight against the CAB. Because the CAB 3 is more about succession, about power, as you put it, about preserving the loot, and about avoiding the day of reckoning as far as possible. Let me move on to Jameson Timber. Jameson, are you ready now? Jameson.
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, thank you very much. Thanks, Ibo. Thanks, Sapes, for convening this important dialogue. Allow me at the outset to locate this discussion within a clear conceptual and historical frame. Hello? Because unless we define our terms and understand their roots, we risk misdiagnosing the present moment. When we speak of violence in Zimbabwe, we must move beyond the narrow understanding of physical harm. Violence in our context operates on three interrelated levels. The first level is physical violence, the assaults, the abductions, the beatings, the disruption of meetings. The second level is emotional violence, which is the humiliation, public intimidation, targeting of families and communities. And then the third level is psychological violence, which is the creation of fear, uncertainty, and a pervasive sense that dissent carries consequences. The most powerful form of violence in Zimbabwe today is not often what is done, but what is made possible through fear. It is the internalization of risk by the citizen, where citizens begin to silence themselves, not because they've been beaten, but because they know they can be beaten. Impunity, on the other hand, in its simplest form, is the absence of accountability. But in Zimbabwe, impunity has evolved into something much, much more structured. It is predictable, it is selective, and crucially, it is protective of power. Acts of violence in Zimbabwe are not random. They occur within an environment where perpetrators are reasonably certain. One, they will not be investigated. Two, they will not be prosecuted. And in some cases, they will be rewarded. Impunity in Zimbabwe, therefore, is not a failure of the system. It is a feature of how the system actually functions. So over the years in Zimbabwe, violence and impunity have been used as political instruments. And to understand our present moment, we must be honest about the past. In post-independent Zimbabwe, violence and impunity have repeatedly accompanied key national processes, be it electoral cycles, constitutional moments like what we have now, periods of political contestation. These are not isolated incidents. They form a pattern where coercion is deployed at moments when citizen choice threatens established power. Over time, this has produced a political culture where violence becomes a tool of political management and impunity becomes its guarantee mechanism. Where does this come from, Honorable Moderator? At the center of this system lies a critical structural issue. And that structural issue has been the conflation of the party and state in Zimbabwe. The ruling party's interests are treated as national interests. State institutions are repurposed to advance partisan objectives of the ruling party. In this framework, the police do not act as neutral enforcers of law. They act often as instruments of political order. What does this result in? It creates an environment where citizens are not equal before the law. Enforcement becomes selective. Protection becomes conditional. The line between the state and the ruling party collapses, and with it, the principle of constitutional neutrality. If we then apply this framework to our current CAB 3 hearings, which took place a week ago, it is within this context that we must understand what has occurred around those hearings. What we witnessed is not spontaneous disorder. In actual fact, it is the reproduction of a long-standing political method that Tendai made reference to. You restrict participation, you intimidate dissenting voices, then you control the narrative of public consultation. The violence we are seeing, therefore, whether physical disruption, intimidation, or fear, is consistent with this pattern. And the absence of accountability for these acts reflects the same architecture of impunity. So when we analyze CAB 3, we must resist the temptation to treat the current events as isolated or exceptional. They are not. They are systemic. And unless we address the underlying relationship between violence, impunity, and the party-state structure, we will continue to reproduce the same outcomes, regardless of the issue at hand. So, Ibo, from this foundation, I'll make 3 key submissions. The just ended consultation process lacks constitutional legitimacy. The environment of fear fundamentally invalidates citizen participation. A lawful, citizen-driven corrective pathway is both necessary and possible. If the environment in which citizens speak is compromised, then what is produced cannot be called the will of the people. Under these circumstances, then as a people, we need to look at the alternatives. What are our alternatives in terms of the same constitution? The people have to take over the process of the current discussions taking place regarding the constitution. We have to look at what are our options in terms of the same constitution under section 59 of the constitution. And as Tendai was rightly said, where we are heading is not a very nice place that all of us want to be. The parties within ZANU-PF themselves who are at loggerheads over this CAB 3 are both engaged in a zero-sum game. That zero-sum game, at the end of the day, will leave so many hands bent. It is a place that we can all avoid, and that avoidance means the abandonment of the current madness represented by CAB 3. Let me end here for now, Ibo.
before you end, I have to ask you one or two questions. What's the likely trajectory from now to the next month, 2 months? Taking into account what you just said about the consultation process being flawed, and secondly about alternatives. Would you want to speak about the alternatives, the options that lie before us as citizens of this country?
First of all, it is clear that those who are promoting CAP 3 have already crossed the Rubicon. They cannot come back from where they are. So I see them trudging along and hoping for the best. But on the other hand, I can say to you, Ibo, I've been traveling around. The level of anger amongst ordinary Zimbabweans is huge. People are unhappy. People are dealing with very basic survival issues, and now they're having to be told that there must be a continuation of the environment that we have. So we are heading for a head-on collision.
Yeah, but Tendai made reference to the internecine conflict within the state itself. And we know that a few weeks ago, Chiwenga stood up in the Politburo and made very clear his position on CAP 3. What is your understanding of the nature of the divide within the state itself? And what chances are there for that dissenting view to gain momentum right across the society? Can we conclude that the state itself is divided?
The state is as divided as it was in 2017, Ibo, if I'm to draw an analogy. And I would like to draw your attention to the statement, the written statement by retired Air Marshal Henry Muchena to Parliament. Okay? And I would like you to look at the substance of that statement and compare it with the substance of the statement issued by retired General Chiwenga in 2017, when the current president had been fired as vice president. The substance of those two statements is not different. And if you read that as a student of politics, then you will have an appreciation of the moment that we are in now as a country. And my colleague today is really clearly.
Yeah, but you're both talking tongue in cheek. You're both talking tongue in cheek. You're both talking tongue in cheek on this question I've raised about Chiwenga. Are you saying that the tanks are likely to roll at this rate? I mean, what is Chiwenga's? What's the balance of forces within the Politburo, within the state, between Chiwenga and the cartel, to use the term that BT has used very appropriately?
Sorry, Iba, I missed the last bit of your question.
I want trying to get you to answer the question about the balance of forces within the state itself between Chiwenga and those behind him, including the generals, retired generals, on the one hand, and the cartel, reference to which Tendai has made very appropriately in his outline. Who is likely to win, in other words?
Well, I wish I was in Nganga, Ibo, but I'm not. But what
no, I don't want to push you against the wall. I don't push you. The public Zimbabwe.
What I can confirm.
Give Mkoma Jameson a bottle of whiskey and he will answer you. Give him whiskey. Give him whiskey.
Whiskey.
A blue label.
I'll give you one tomorrow. Answer the
Yeah.
question, Jameson.
Then you get your answers. He knows. He's a nganga.
What
He
I can
knows.
confirm is that there's visible elite discohesion in the state.
Yeah, let's get away from that.
and-
We are talking now. We're in the middle of a crisis, right? Tendai has outlined it very in detailed fashion. Okay, we have a balance of forces. You yourself have made reference to similarities between Chiwenga's statement on the what day was it in November, the 15th, and Muchena's statement the other day. Enough indication that there is a rift within the state, within ZANU-PF itself. I'm not talking about the rift between the ZANU-PF state and the people. I'm just talking within, and the possibility that that rift can explode and create a new dynamic around which the social forces might act more appropriately than they did in 2017 by putting across
Well,
a better
I
alternative
want
than
I want to avoid going there, Ibo. But what I can bet on myself, Ibo, is that at the end of the day, okay, at the end of the day, the people of Zimbabwe will serve Zimbabwe.
Aye, Waka, that's romantic. Want to discuss a social process? We are right in the middle of this. We have fought hard. Most of the Zimbabwean society has fought hard against this CAP 3. It's likely that they'll go through to Parliament, given the do or die attitude of the cartel. They'll go through, regardless. They will be passed in Parliament. The bill will be assigned by Emerson. What do we do in the circumstance such as that? This is the question I'm trying to put across. We cannot be romantic that say people in the end people will win. Yes, but there's a famous saying that in the long run we're all dead. What do we do in the immediate? What is the organizational process? What is the agency through which to fight this and to bring about a better Zimbabwe tomorrow? What is the process? What are we going to do? We can't just keep speaking against. We must also put an alternative before the people. Huh? Outline the alternative, Jameson.
Tendai, would you like to come in there?
Tendai, you may come in.
come?
Right, Tony?
Okay.
Pindurai mkoma.
So, what's
Carry on, Tony.
what's on the cards right now is rejection. Rejection by multiple constituencies within and without the state. No to an elite grab for power forever. Now, my good colleagues here have outlined all the difficulties for the citizen. I want to put forward a notion to you. There are 2 times in my agedness that I can remember when the people of Zimbabwe mobilized. One was the Liberation War, and despite all the rhetoric of ZANU-PF, that was not entirely about land, and that has been repeated endlessly, actually, by the generals and other generals and the war veterans, that we went to have a vote. We want power. The second process was the NCA process, which led to the formation of formidable opposition to ZANU-PF under the NCA. We want a new constitution. So at this critical point, there are 2 options you're offering the citizen. One is to say no to a constitution and elite grab. And 2, the alternative is, what is the positive? What is the positive vision that would mobilize people? And I suggest in all the work that I've done in discussing people, they want to see a serious change. They want to see a state that's responsive. They want to see a state that delivers public goods and services. All of these things are so manifest amongst our population and drive their anger. But saying no to something is not the same as saying yes to something. So I would say, if you said we are embarking on a process to block a constitutional amendment, to avoid phony elections, and I have some serious reservations about the referendum idea, but I'll leave that for the time being. If you said to people, would you be supportive of the notion that we would have a transition that included reform, the dealing with the capture of the state, the broken separation of powers that we see, the military obeying the Constitution, as the generals have said quite clearly, they wish to be in a position to defend the Constitution. Would this not be a positive message? And at the end of it, you would say, we're asking for a transition. Now, I know for 10 years of working my colleague here, that every time we've raised this notion that a full-on reformist transition is a good idea, everybody says yes. And at every point that this has been raised in the crises we've had, 2017 would be a classic example of it, everybody has said, but they will never give up power. And the answer is that power is given up when the state can actually no longer govern. And what I'm hearing from my colleagues here is the state is perilously close to being unable to govern. And in those processes, negotiations happen. And Tendai pointed it out. He said, what do we need? We need dialogue and we need transition. Now, that's a message of hope to people. It's not a negative thing saying, stop them doing what they're doing, stop them stealing the money, stop them having organized violence and torture against us, stop them having crimes against humanity. That's a positive vision. Now, that's, for me, is a mobilizing call. And I suspect, listening to what I hear from generals, war veterans, everybody else, that this is an idea that has some traction finally. And that's what I would propose, is that we now need to pose a vision for people that they can organize against, positively, not negatively.
Thanks, Tony. Tendai, take on from there. You have on various occasions given us some indications of how, and to quote you last year already, you spoke about the need of a referendum tendent to the NTA. Is this an occasion to raise the question now and the possibilities thereof? Tendai?
Yeah. The NTA offers a soft landing for Zimbabwe. A dialogue offers a soft landing for Zimbabwe. And it's an attractive option in that it gives people time out. It allows people the opportunity of fixing the state, of redefining a new consensus that should prevail after the period of turbulence. It's in the best interest of alternative voices. The formal opposition has been destroyed by greed, but it's also in the interest of ZANU-PF itself, because ZANU-PF is going through a transition. They've got a president who is 80-something old. So whether they like it or not, they're also in a transition. The economy needs a timeout. The past 2 years have been since John Part 2 came, has been a serious crisis of corruption and leakages, a serious crisis of under-accumulation, an induced depression induced by tight monetary policy. But it's just a delayed match. We all know that there's going to be an implosion. But yet it's a period that has seen some quarters of the economy booming There's been a gold boom in the country ever since Trump was elected, and wars popped all over the show. There's been a boom in other commodities like lithium, but we've not been able to harvest that as a country. So a timeout, which the NTA offers, a timeout is a perfect opportunity for the country to restart, but it requires leadership. It requires leadership to understand that this is what is needed, and certainly that leadership will not be found in ZANU-PF. But when people negotiate, they don't negotiate voluntarily. They negotiate because their backs are on the wall. In 2008, everyone's back was on the wall. Mugabe, the economies, for Christ's sake, inflation had reached 500 billion percent. So their backs were on the wall. I think the implosion will force a dialogue. But unfortunately, and underline what I said implosion. Yet it's foreseeable that implosion is coming. So it only makes sense that the dialogue starts right now.
So, CDF, DCP, how shall we get the dialogue starting? National conference or dialogue to the national conference in the first instance, and a detailed outline of how the NT will look like. Tendai, how do you propose we move forward right now?
I think bodies like CDF, DCP, we need a national people's convention.
Okay.
We need a people's convention. We need a people's convention chaired by the church. We trust the church, so we all go there, and then we come up with a roadmap. So a people's convention will absolutely be essential. And then if we do agree on that, I've always argued that you need a referendum to make the necessary constitutional amendments. It must be owned by the people and so forth. It's doable. The Kenyans did it with their Boma process, 2006, 2007, and they agreed on a certain process which was people driven, and they've had challenges, but their democracy is enduring. Kasongo is going in the next election. There's no doubt about it. He'll be a one-term president because of the foundations that were laid at Boma. And you know whom Kasongo is.
Yeah, I know. But I wanted to, maybe not today, but in the next fortnight, to deal more coherently and with the details about which you have spoken before, Tendai.
I think don't do it on a public platform. I think let's have a small group of people. Let's have a small group of people that will meet in a room for 2 days. Yes. We can go to Kariba and come up with a document.
Yes, I agree. Jameson, you have bailed out. I scared you the questions are posed for you. You left your colleague to answer the question. But I think I hope you have heard what Tendai has to say. Now, Jameson, you want to come in? Come in, Jameson.
Unmute.
Unmute. Unmute. Jameson, unmute. Jameson, not chamber a woman. Unmute. Unmute, Jameson. Tony, your last word for this evening. You have heard what Tendai had to say about the way forward. It's a bit muted, but I think it was very, between the lines, it was very solid in terms of the way forward. We must begin working behind the scenes and towards a national conference, national dialogue, and an NTA.
Yeah, I completely agree. My only comment is that I'm really, in the current dispensation, wholly unsupportive of the notion about a referendum on the Constitutional Amendment No.3. I think a state in charge of referenda or elections in the current dispensation is likely to be a disaster. So I'm understanding what Tendai says is a referendum about a transition, and that I wholly support. That's a very different referendum than a negative one, which is to say we don't like your current dispensation. And the reason I say that is that there have been two referendums. I never know whether it's referendums or referenda. But in 2000, that referendum was a public opinion survey for ZANU-PF to understand where their support stood. In 2013, it was a vote for a constitution, but that was a vote for a constitution in which both political parties were supportive. This is not a referendum in which everybody is agreed that this referendum is anything but massively conflictual. So I fear about a referendum for Constitutional Amendment No.3, but I totally support the notion of a referendum for a transitional arrangement. Thank you.
Timber, your last word. Timber, next time you come on the program, please, as DCP, have a secure network. Yeah. So, Tendai, your last word before I close the meeting.
I think the Aluta continues, the struggle continues. We shouldn't allow, and we cannot allow CAP 3 to see the light of day. We have to defend it with our lives. If this thing passes, we have no country. We might as well emigrate. So this is the biggest fight of this generation. This is the biggest existential threat we have faced since Kugrawundi. We have to fight and look the beast called ZANU-PF in the eye. So it's Aluta continue.
Thanks, Tendai. Thanks very much. I have little to add, except to say one, first and foremost, is to thank DCP and the totality of Zimbabwean civil society, the Zimbabweans as a whole, at home and abroad, for fighting back as they've done. I think those pushing CAP 3 are shocked at the extent to which there's been a fight back by the population. And it reminds me very much of 1971, many of you were not there, when the British and the Rhodesians thought the population was supine, under control, and they introduced the Pearce Commission. And we fought like we are doing now. And the Pearce Commission was defeated. And this is like history repeating itself. And the only question I have is this: the British folded their hands, they pulled out. I just find that the Ganandas and the current state leadership rather playing it very dangerous. In the face of such loud rejection of this CAP 3, the obvious thing to do would be to stop the process. It's obvious thing for Emerson Mnangagwa is to refuse to sign that bill. But will they do that? I think the conclusion that we've made here, we need to move towards dialogue. Whatever happens with this CAP 3, it will not be the end of the process at all. The call for a dialogue and a new process that can get us out of this mess becomes even more imperative. So on that note, and taking into account the recommendations made between the lines, albeit, we will put our heads together in the days ahead. Thank you, and thanks Tony, Tendai, and Jameson Timber. Thank you very much. And to all those, over 200 who have joined us today, I must make the point here that we have been an average about 25,000 will follow this program. Please support this program by liking this video and subscribing to our channel, and spread the word. Thank you.
Tango e komaka, kaina komi moto.